Hi folks, and welcome back to Through a Scottish Prism. Starting a wee bit unusual, this programme, from normal, because it is an unusual programme, or edition, whatever we call it, this week. I had the great pleasure of interviewing someone who was meant to be a 20-25 minute interview, as it usually is, but it went on well over an hour, and it's now a standalone programme. And this is a new Scot, a lady originally from County Durham, who became a New Scot in 2011. She is a journalist, a socialist, a feminist, an abstentionist. She was even nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. And her life story, or just a small portion of it that you're about to hear in this interview, is quite extraordinary. And I thought it was worth a standalone programme all on its own. So what I would do is get yourself settled down, get yourself a wee cup of tea. You might want to take a break in between, but this whole programme is so worth watching. And I hope you enjoy it as much as I enjoyed talking to Yvonne Ridley.
Through a Scottish Prism, the programme that is unapologetically pro-Scottish independence and anti-Westminster rule. Everything we say here is viewed through a Scottish prism. Brought to you by Barhead Boy.
So welcome to Scottish Prism.
Yes, thank you very much. I hope it's going to be worth everybody's while after such a lot of effort.
Well, I have done some research, and I have to say that if it isn't, it will not be down to you, it will be down to me. Because, I mean, for example, you started work in the Durham area for the Durham Advertiser. That's where you began your journalistic career.
That's right. It's a pizza parlour now, but it was quite a good training ground, because if you made any mistakes, if you spelled anyone's name wrong or did anything that was factually incorrect, the reader didn't send in a letter. They actually came physically into the office, and that was quite... you never made the same mistake twice.
No, but you went. I mean, what made you decide to go into journalism in the first place? Was there?
Well, I was 14, and it was during the winter of discontent. And for those old enough to remember, we were all on power cuts, and bins weren't being emptied, and the country was in chaos. And there was the 3-day week, and the power cuts were incessant. And Newcastle United, my beloved football club, had a big game. It was a midweek game, and they were worried about the power cuts. And so they got some great big generators into St. James's Park to make sure that there was plenty of lighting. And in the event of a power cut, these generators would, kick in and keep the game going. And as much as I love football, I wrote a letter to the Evening Chronicle and said, surely all this time and effort would be better spent on keeping our old people, OAPs we were called then, keeping our pensioners warm, and using these generators in old people's homes instead of the club. And there was quite a reaction to the letter, and a lot of people contacted me, and I just thought, wow, this is amazing, the power of the written word. And so I decided then and there, I quite like this. I'm going to become a journalist. And so it was the publication of a letter in the Evening Chronicle that kicked it all off.
So that was that your socialism or your Christianity that you think brought that to the surface?
I think it was probably more my working class background, I would say. Where we're all in it together, and we're all struggling together, and we look out for each other. And I think that epitomises the working class, and it's something that trendy socialists in Islington have never really got the hang of.
Yeah. Well, of course, we've got the common weal, which has always been a thing in my politics and certainly in Scottish politics. It's the same thing. But you went on from the advertiser. I mean, you've worked for all the big, well, most of the big titles. You could be known as Miss Fleet Street, because if I've missed any, let me know. But you worked for the Sunday Times, the Independent on Sunday, the Observer, the Mirror, even the News of the World. Yvonne, I'm shocked. The News of the World. You were the editor of the Wales on Sunday, the chief reporter for the Sunday Express. You also worked for Al Jazeera. Have I missed anyone?
The Daily Mirror and the Sunday Express and Press. I helped launch Press TV for the Iranians, and I helped launch the English version of Al Jazeera for the Qataris.
I mean, amazing. And the Northern Echo, of course. It's and you're as you said, I said in the intro, you're a feminist, you're a lefty, you're a socialist, and you joined the Labour Party when you were quite young.
Yes, I was 16, 17 when I joined, and that was one of the hardest decisions that I made, to tear up my Labour Party membership.
Yeah.
And I sought the advice of Tony Benn, who I really admired. I was living in London by then, and it was because of the war in Iraq. And I said, I don't think I can stay in the party anymore. And he said, there are far too many good socialists out there without a home. And if you leave, where will you go? And of course, he was right. There was nowhere to go at that point. But in the end, I did leave. I just felt that I couldn't remain within the party. And it also coincided with me joining Al Jazeera, so that made it easier.
Yes, so you went to Al Jazeera, and that's when it coincided.
Yes, and so I left the Labour Party, and on reflection, Tony Benn was right. I had left myself without a home. But while I was over in Qatar, I heard about George Galloway and Ken Loach, George Monbiot, and some other really credible names were going to start a party called Respect. And so when I left Al Jazeera, I got sacked, actually, for starting a trade union in Qatar when trade unions were banned. But so I'm saying I left. I was asked to leave, and I went and joined the Respect Party. And it was a very exciting time because there were a lot of really good quality socialists who were involved, and everything was going really well. We stood in the European elections. We had candidates in every single seat. We had a party
in England.
Yes. In fact, what is interesting, somebody was saying, why don't we go into Scotland? And George Galloway said, there's absolutely no need. They've got the SNP there, so there's no need to go into Scotland.
Wow, that is a shock. I mean, because that's the one thing about George I find strange. I mean, he believes in liberation for Palestine, for a united Ireland, and yet for his own country of birth, he wants it to remain a satellite of Westminster, which, I mean, it just doesn't, I've never been able to work that one out with George.
I've No, it puzzled me, and you know, George was a political mentor for me, and
I would call him a
but
political mentor myself, but that's...
well, we haven't spoken for about 10 years now. I don't like falling out with people, so I've just decided not to pick up the phone. Although he did block me on Twitter, which was quite a shock.
Me too.
But last year during the Scottish elections, and he came up and he was standing in the south of Scotland under some party, I can't remember what its name was.
Right-wing Tory party.
Well, he said, put your first vote with the Tories, your second vote with me. And so I said, my goodness, somebody's hacked George Galloway's Twitter account. And I was blocked.
Well, it's amazing. He's got a blind spot when it comes to Scotland. The fact that he'll sup with Tories. I mean, it really is quite. You know, but you were saying you'd know where to go now. And how difficult it was to leave the Labour Party. I can absolutely empathise with that. When I had the same problem when I left the SNP, it was difficult, and there was no ALAPA at the time, and it is horrible. But fortunately for me, ALAPA has come along. But for you in England, still in England, there is nowhere for people to go. The lefties have got nothing, because with the greatest respect, the Labour Party is not a left-wing party now. I mean, it's a Tory-light party. No, and the lefties have a problem down there, do they not? There's a gap.
Well, they've got a huge problem. And, you know, this is why most socialists in England are against the idea of independence in Scotland, because what they say is, if you get independence in Scotland, we will be consigned to a Tory party for the rest of our lives. I've said,
Selfish.
well, apart from it being selfish, I said, you know, if we get I should say, when we get an independent Scotland, it will raise the bar so high that even some dyed-in-the-wool Tories will turn round and say, why are they getting all these benefits in Scotland? And I do think that the Scottish people would get or produce a better education system, a better health system, and the difference would show.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's when people would actually turn and realise that the Tories are just vampires that are sucking them dry, and that they're allowing it to happen. And sadly, as you pointed out, there's no credible opposition at the moment in England.
No,
there is in Wales with Plaid Cymru.
Exactly.
But I think that the Wales, the ambitions for independence are about 30 years behind Scotland.
Yeah, but the problem is down in England that, as you would say, I mean, there's the Green Party, but they're not really credible. But there just doesn't seem any desire by the left in England to do something about it. I mean, they're flogging a dead horse with Labour.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you know, with the best will in the world, Keir Starmer just doesn't come over as a socialist.
Well, that's because he's not.
Well, and desperate to make some sort of an alliance with the Tories.
Yeah.
You know, he's tried it so many times. He saw the pandemic as an opportunity to get in bed with the Tories and say, you know, we'll help, and it's like the old adage, he's someone with a knife and fork looking for someone with a steak. And of course, the Tories are far too greedy to have him at their table. And working class people can see through him. But the working class people in England have been betrayed for so long by Labour that's why they've left.
Correct.
And although how they could vote Tory in places like Northwest Durham, Sedgefield, Blythe.
Bolsover, for goodness sake, Bolsover.
Yes, well, and it's because Labour didn't handle the Brexit message at all very well.
Yep. But the other thing is that's clear, and which put me off about Jeremy Corbyn as well, is this: they are imperialists as well. You know, again, Jeremy Corbyn's another one like George Galloway. He believes in a united Ireland. He believes in a proper state in Palestine. But when it comes to Scotland, no, you're still a possession of Westminster, which didn't help Labour. But I can understand, we all moved, that happened with Labour in Scotland, and people woke up and went to the SNP, only to now become very disappointed on what we've got. But down at least we've got ALAPA now, an ISP. We've got places for the lefties to go. But in England, no, there's nowhere for them to go, because I hear them say, let's get rid of Boris. Oh yeah, great idea. But who do you replace him with, Yvonne? Patel? You know, Sunak? Gove? Okay, and you get rid of them, bring in Sir Keir. There is no choice for the poor English people.
I think that Rishi Sunak is probably the most dangerous of the lot. And I say that because he's got such a pleasant manner. He's so polite, and he comes over as so sweet and so nice. And then you have to sort of shake your head and think, hang on a minute, he's a Tory.
Exactly.
But Boris, the way that the English voters see him is quite different to the way that the Scottish voters see him. And, you know, I get sick and tired when I go over the border and see my relatives, and I'll say, Boris Johnson, this, and they go, oh, it's just Boris. You know, he's daft as a brush. As though he's, you know, just some wayward juvenile delinquent who's a bit of a laugh, and he's not. He's running the.
It's crook. I prefer, there's a great one in Glasgow which they keep rubbing out graffiti, and it keeps coming back, which just says Boris Johnson is a pure fanny, which is the way the Glasgow folk and Scottish folk view him. And you know, it's like the thing in the Duke of Wellington's hat. They can get rid of it, but it'll just keep coming back. But to get back to your life and your politics, you then, when you left Al Jazeera, is that when you went to work for the Sunday Express?
No, I'd been working for the Sunday Express for 2 or 3 years, and that's when I had the unfortunate incident.
Yeah, we're coming to that. Yeah, because I was going to ask you about that, because you then, I don't know, were you inspired by John Simpson sneaking across, or did you already plan to sneak yourself into Afghanistan?
I'd already planned to do it, and with all due respect to John Simpson, he went into the tribal areas, which isn't really Afghanistan, and sort of sat in the back of a truck in a burqa, and I don't think he put a foot on the ground. But I was already planning to go in. What I was planning to do initially was to go to an Al-Qaeda training camp. And
sorry to interrupt you just for a second. I should set the state for the people watching. This was before the war began with America and the UK. This was before that.
That's
not
right.
Much before it, but before it.
Yes, it was in September. It was just after the horrific events of 9/11.
Yeah.
And I had a brilliant guide. He was a local taxi driver, and he said to me, we can go into Afghanistan, and I can, you know, to a degree, keep an eye on things. But if we go into the Al-Qaeda camp, once we get into that camp, we're both under their sort of control. And I'm really not sure what they're going to be like. So I said, well, in that case, let's go into Afghanistan. It's easier. and we'll go in for 2 or 3 days and then just come back out. And it was actually the better thing to do, because there was a very brave journalist called Daniel Pearl who worked for the Wall Street Journal, and he was in contact with the same people that we were in touch with to go into the training camp. And of course he went and didn't get out again. He was executed. So as it turned out, the better call was to go into Afghanistan, but that in itself resulted in me being captured 2 days later by the Taliban.
So what I'm led to believe, you can tell me if it's right, but you were on the back of a donkey that bolted, and they spotted your camera, and that's what brought you to their attention. And this is right. 2001, September 2001.
That's right. It was just a bit of a farce, really, and the donkey threw me off in the end. I've never been on the back of a donkey since. I don't like them at all. I'm probably the only person in Britain who wouldn't give a few pennies to the donkey sanctuaries. But I was, as I say, arrested.
Must have been scary, very scary.
It was terrifying because, well, initially they didn't realize I was a Westerner because, of course, I'm still in the burqa. And the Taliban soldier was shouting at me, presumably was saying, hand over the camera. So I handed over the camera, and then I stepped back and closed my eyes because I thought, I'm going to be shot now. And after about 10 seconds, which is a long time waiting to be shot, I opened my eyes again, and he'd gone. He'd gone to the donkey trader, because in his mind, he would find out who's in charge of me, and then he'd find the real culprit. So, women are so insignificant in their culture that, he wasn't bothered at all about me. And I thought, I can get away. And a group of people walked past, and there were 3 women on the end wearing burqas. And I thought, well, what's one more burqa? Nobody's going to notice. And so I just tagged on to the end. And then I looked back, and by this time I saw a crowd of angry men around the Taliban soldier who was waving the camera in the face of one of my guides. And I thought, well, we did agree if things went pear-shaped that we wouldn't, know each other, or we'd try and get away. And I thought, things have gone pear-shaped, so it's every man, woman for themselves. And I continued walking, and then I looked back, and the row had got bigger and the crowd was getting bigger. And I just thought, oh, gosh, I can't leave them. And so I walked back, and I tried to push my way through this crowd of angry men, and was thrown back because, this was man's business. It had nothing to do with a woman. So I tried to force my way back into the crowd again, and again I was thrown back. So I was wearing a shalwar kameez, and so I took off my burqa and shouted in a very loud voice, will somebody let me through? And suddenly everybody stopped and looked and thought, where's this blonde-haired, blue-eyed woman come from? What's she doing here? And I went over to the soldier, who was gawping and thinking, what's going on? And I threw a quick look to my guides, because I thought they would think, gosh, what a noble gesture. And so I glanced over to them, and they looked back at me as if to say, well, we were in trouble before, but now we're in serious trouble. And I realized it probably wasn't the best thing to do, although they did have the camera and they did develop the film, so they would have found out that I had been there. So we, got bundled away, and after that, there was
Was
just
there
a
any
lot.
violence? Did they hit you or beat you or
No,
anything?
no, the only aggression came from me. I decided, rather riskily, looking back, that this is the most evil, brutal regime in the world. That's what George Bush and Tony Blair say, and you know they wouldn't lie to us, would they? and they hate women, so I'm not going to see the sunset tonight. So I was rude to them. I threw things at them. I spat at them. I, I wouldn't cooperate with them after the fifth or sixth day. And I went on hunger strike, and that really upset them. And, you know, they kept saying to me through a translator, why are you being like this? You were our guest. We want you to be happy. And I'm thinking, hang on a minute, what don't you understand about your job description? You're supposed to be brutal, evil, and hate women. And I realized that I probably got special treatment because I was white. You know, there is white privilege, and I have to accept that, you know, that probably contributed to the way in which they treated me. I think they were also scared of me. And when they did finally release me, the foreign minister's deputy said, "Ridley, you are a man," which I think he thought was being a compliment.
And that whole time, were you still convinced that you were going to be shot?
Every day, every single day. And I just thought, on the grounds that you don't kiss the hand that slaps you, you know, give them hell before you go. And that's what I did. Even when they released me and the war had started by
Yeah,
that time.
because you were released on they were releasing you the day after the bombing started. Did you?
That's right.
And did that make when the bombing started? Did you hear it, or were you aware that this was happening?
Yes, I saw it. They had moved me out of the. By this time, I was in a prison in Kabul, and they moved me out of the female wing of the prison, and they put me upstairs in the Taliban sleeping quarters, and they said that tomorrow you will go home. And I just thought, oh, this is it. This is when I'm going to be put against the wall and shot. So I was in a room on my own when the war started, and it was absolutely terrifying. And I just thought, if I'm not killed by British or American bombs, I'll probably be ripped apart by ordinary Afghan people, you know, because we are now at war, and they know that there are Westerners in Kabul in this prison. But the next day, they drove me down back to the border with Pakistan, and they said, "You're free to go." But even then, I didn't trust them. I got out of the people carrier backwards because I wanted to keep an eye on them. And I walked backwards away from them quite slowly for a few yards. And then I turned, and there were scores of Pakistan media at the handover. And they just shouted, you know, how are you? How did the Taliban treat you? And I thought about it, and I thought, gosh, you know, they treated me very well. And I then thought about how I had behaved towards them. And I thought, oh, I really should go back and apologize. And then I thought, if I turn around now and walk back towards them, they probably will shoot me. They'll think, oh, that awful woman's coming back. And in fact, the Taliban ambassador, Mullah Abdul Salam Zaif, gave a press conference saying, we are releasing the English woman. She's a very bad woman with a very bad mouth. And my mother was furious, not with him, but with me for showing her up. And when I got home, she said, I was so embarrassed, that poor man, when he said that. And she said, what did you say? And I said, oh, I just said a few bloodies here and a few other B words. But I said, I never used the F word, and I certainly didn't use the C word. And she said, what's the C word? I said, never mind. I didn't.
Conservative.
Yeah.
Same thing, means the exact same thing. But you also, I'm led to believe, you kept a diary concealed inside a toothpaste, a box inside a toothpaste. How did you manage that?
Well, they gave me toothpaste and a toothbrush, and it was Chinese toothpaste, and I have to say it was really awful. Gosh, that the worst toothpaste I've ever tasted. But the box I unpicked and flattened out, and I thought, I'm going to keep write in really tiny handwriting. And I remember reading about the Republican prisoners in the maze who used such tiny writing that I think they had to use magnifying glasses later to read it. So I tried that, and you can, when you write in that in such a tiny way, you can keep things. So I had space for about 3 more days, but I was starting to run out. And so when they said they were releasing me, I shoved this down the back of my pants because I thought they'll probably search me, and but they didn't, which was also just as well, because I smuggled out a few letters from other prisoners who wanted their family to know how they were, and so I wasn't searched when I left the prison either.
Yeah. And your guides, and including their 5-year-old daughter, they were put into a prison in Kabul, is that right? But they got released unharmed later?
Yes, the daughter was released in Jalalabad to some relatives, and then the two guides were taken up to Kabul with me, and they were released later. In fact, when the Taliban fled from Kabul, they gave them a lift down to the border and just said, it's every man for himself now.
Yeah.
But I had been pleading through Pashto radio for clemency.
And the Persian service, yeah.
Mm-hmm. It was quite awkward because I had said from the beginning, I don't know who they are. They're nothing to do with me. And they said, well, if you don't tell us who they are and your story, we will torture them and we will punish them. And I said, do what you want with them. I said, they're nothing to me. And they looked at me as though, oh, what a horrible woman. And when I saw my guides later, when we were all free, I met up with them on a subsequent trip to Pakistan. And one of them said, oh, they told us that they were beating you and that they were going to make us listen to your screams and that your screams were unbearable. So we told them everything. I didn't have the heart to tell them what I had said. But yes, they, so, and, I apologized to them and said, that are you angry with me for what happened? And they said, no, it was written for us. We knew that this would they were referring to their faith. They were both Muslims, and you know, they were very fatalistic and just thought it was going to happen anyway, which is a nice looking at things.
There's another. They asked you or said to you or made you promise that you would read the Quran if they let you go free. Now, most people are just, yeah, absolutely, I'll do that, no problem. First thing I'll do, and then wouldn't do it. But you actually did read it.
Yeah, well, just by watching, as I'm sure Craig Murray will tell you when he comes out of prison, you sit there and you start counting everything, and you start watching everything, and things that you wouldn't normally pay much attention to. You look at everything in detail. And I noticed that their faith was a way of life. You know, 5 times a day they were praying, the way they dressed, the way they ate, the way they slept, the way they behaved. Everything had an Islamic context. And I just thought, if I'm to report with any accuracy on the Muslim world, I need to find out more about this this great faith. So I started reading the Quran, but it was the fulfillment of a promise. I also think if you give your word, you should try and keep it. But I started reading the Quran, and it was really just an educational exercise. But it very soon turned into a spiritual journey for me. What a lot of people didn't realize was I was already a practicing Christian. I was a Protestant, and I went to church maybe twice a month, which, let's face it, in Britain is bordering on fanaticism.
Absolutely.
So and it was very easy for me to read, very easy for me to understand. And I've always had a core belief in God. And so, yes, I'm, you know, after 2 years, I ended up converting to Islam. And changing the faith wasn't the big leap, because I'm still praying to the same God, but it was the change in lifestyle. The booze went, the clubbing went, the cigarettes went, and I had a much more focused, quiet life. And I also had to reinvent myself as a journalist, because I couldn't do undercover work anymore. That was the other thing that shocked me, that that my story had gone global. I didn't think that it was that important, but there was a lot of politics behind that as well.
And you wrote a book was it In the Hands of the Taliban? You wrote a book about your capture, but in it you say that when you didn't realise at the time, but when you met some of your captors, they were lowering their gaze, which was a sign of respect, but you didn't understand that at the time.
Complete clash of cultures. They didn't understand me. I didn't understand them. I thought they couldn't look at me because they were too guilty. They'd already decided that they were going to kill me. And as you said, you know, they were showing me respect. And from their side as well, there were some really funny things that happened. I remember the 3rd or 4th day they came in, these really scary looking men, and said, you know, you have lied to us. And I said, everything I've told you is the truth. And they said, you didn't tell us you had a daughter. And I said, well, you never asked me. And they said, yes, but you said you weren't married. I said, well, I'm not married. Well, how can you have a daughter? Laughing, saying, are you guys serious? And they were. And so, you know, I told them about Daisy's father. And it was really quite funny, some of the things that that happened. And then another one said, very accusingly, so you don't have a husband? And I said, no. Well, why haven't you remarried? And I looked at him and I said, I have my own house, I have my own car, I have my own money. I have my own job. Why would I want a man? And I thought they were going to pass out, and they all got up and collectively walked out. And the translator said, "Oh," he said, "you know, they can't bear to look at you. They're so disgusted with you. And, you know, these people scare me and they should scare you." And I said, "Well, you know, but this sums up the Taliban. That, you know, they are very puritanical, very sort of conservative with a small c, and you know that is the way they are, and so they aren't like us, and they wouldn't be offended if I said that. They have different values, and they don't want to be like us, and obviously we don't want to be like them, but I think we have to learn to respect the differences between us and stop trying to change each other. You know, I think that everybody is concerned about women's rights in Afghanistan, quite rightly. But we're not going to improve women's rights by lecturing the Taliban. We probably stand a better chance of doing that by engaging with them and by talking to them.
Yeah, we should also be concerned about women's rights in Scotland, and we'll come on to that. But I was just thinking, you said you've always had a core belief of, you know, some supreme being or something. Do you think that could be anything to do with your love of Newcastle United, that you needed to find something to hang on to? That was below the belt, that one, wasn't it? But after your, I couldn't resist it, though. I couldn't resist it. After your conversion, though, I mean, most people who'd been through your experience would be like, "Well, that's it. I'm not leaving County Durham again as long as I live, or London, or wherever." But you then went on an Islamic type world tour to Chechnya, to Israel, well, not just Islamic, but I've got near Kashmir, Uzbekistan, and you were doing lectures in these areas. Is that right? Yes. On what were you actually lecturing them on?
Well, I was talking about the war on terror, and trying to just talk to them about imperialism, colonialism, and because, you know, some people were telling me, well, the British Empire, they did a lot of good for us in India. You know, they built our railroads. I said they only built railroads so they could plunder and steal.
Exactly.
You know, it's really just trying to talk and engage with people and give them the confidence to realize that, you know, they can stand up on their own 2 feet. They don't need to jump whenever Britain or America or the rest of Europe demands it of them, and that there's nothing superior at all about the West. And so that, you know, that was that was a lot of what I was saying. Also, a lot of I was talking about my conversion to Islam, which interested a lot of people. And then when the Arab awakening or the Arab Spring kicked off, you know, I went right across North Africa as well. And I was actually arrested in Libya, and yes, it was quite funny because this militia had hold of us, and it was quite. Gaddafi was on his way out. The Abu Salim prison, one of the most notorious prisons in Libya, had been broken into and all the prisoners had gone, and I wanted to go in with a film crew. So I broke into the prison rather than breaking out, and was arrested for it. And they thought, that I'll be worth something. And I said, look, one of the translators I was working with just translated my words, which were basically, I'm absolutely worthless. If you contacted Britain and said, we've arrested Yvonne Ridley, they'll say, throw away the key. And, I'm not worth anything. And the translator explained that about me being captured by the Taliban, and this impressed them, so that went around, and I was eventually released. It wasn't reported on, thank goodness, because I just thought people would think, what on earth is she up to? But it's just one of those things.
Yeah, you seem to find trouble. It doesn't find you. You seem to go and find it.
Well, my mother did say I could start a fight in an empty room.
But you also, during this time, you were, I don't know if you still feel that way, but you thought that possibly Mossad were planning to kill you. What made you think that?
Well, this was when I was inside the Afghan prison.
Or do you think it was then they would try and kill you to make it look worse for the Afghanistan and justify the war?
Yeah, I mean, they had a file. The Taliban had a file on me. I think it was the 5th day, and they said they changed all their questions. They're very unsophisticated questions about who is your father, who is your father's father, suddenly changed to how much tax do you pay, what sort of house tax do you pay, what sort of money do you receive, how much are your wages, and what it was, they had my bank details and bank statements, but the contents of the statements had been enhanced. Sadly, only on paper, not in real life. And they made it look as though I was getting about £5,000 a month from intelligence services.
Wow.
And it was there were also photographs, and these were supplied by my ex-husband. Well, one of my ex-husbands. I have to say I'm on good terms with all of them, with the exception of this one. And
How many are there?
there was 4.
All right.
So, but I've got a real keeper now, but we can talk about him later. Yeah, this and he was an Israeli. Now, not very many people realized that. And he must have found some documents and photographs and handed them over, and they were, this very elaborate story was done. I didn't realize that until I was released, and somebody told me that Al Jazeera were going to run a documentary about my spying activities. And I said, what spying activities? And I contacted Al Jazeera, and they said, will you give us an interview? And I said, only if you hand over the documents that were given to you. And they said these were also the same documents that were given to the Taliban. And so I was quite shocked to see this intelligence file on me that was just, lies. And it was amazing that that had been pulled together in 3 or 4 days. And there was one particular item that they had to have got into my house in Soho, and the locksmith, who I spoke to later, confirmed that the lock had indeed been tampered with. And this was one of those really heavy deadlocks that I think my flat used to be owned by a drug dealer at one time. And he had quite a heavy security system in place. And I just thought, I did have contacts in the intelligence services, and I went.
So this is as a journalist, you had these contacts?
Yeah, as a journalist, and I went to see one in Whitehall, and said, "What the hell do you think you were doing, trying to get me killed?" And he said, and I showed him the file, and he said, "Oh, that isn't ours." He said, "That's got the clumsy hands of Mossad and the CIA all over it." And he said, "We wouldn't have done anything as elaborate as that." He said, "We would have just shown them this." And he pulled open his drawer and pulled out a picture of me in an army uniform on a firing range, because in a previous life, I had been in the Territorial Army working as a public information officer. And
Wow.
and of course he was quite right. The Taliban would never have got their head round a part-time TA soldier. They would have just seen
Shot you as a spy.
Yeah. So
amazing. But here's the thing I find quite bizarre. You actually, well, it's the 20-year war zone, you went back to Afghanistan of your own free will and volition.
yes, I've been back a few times. Well, I've got no enemies there. When when I came out, the Taliban were braced for what I was going to say. And because I told them that they would all be strung up as war criminals if they didn't let me loose, and, made various empty threats to them. So I think they were quite worried about what I was going to say. And they were quite shocked when I said I was treated with courtesy and respect. So on subsequent trips back to Afghanistan, I have bumped into them, and they did say thank you for telling the truth about us. I kept in touch with some of them, or some of them made contact with me, and I've worked behind the scenes to get several people out of the Taliban captivity, because every now and again they kept arresting foreigners. And the last negotiations that I was involved with was the release of the American soldier Bo Bergdahl, who was exchanged for 5 Taliban prisoners in Guantanamo. Except I was trying to get them, get Bo Bergdahl exchanged for a woman who's in an American prison. So.
And was this at the behest of the American government, or did you just do this off your own bat?
No, I did it off my own bat.
Amazing. And are you still doing any plans in the near future to go back to Afghanistan?
Yes, in fact, when they signed the Doha Agreement in Qatar, they invited me to come along to the ceremony, but it was just as the pandemic was kicking in, and so I couldn't go. And Sohail Shaheen, the Taliban spokesman, he said, "Well, we'll see you in Kabul next year." So they obviously knew that they were going to make a bid for power in 2021.
So you would say it's usual, the propaganda we get, you know, Russians bad, Chinese bad, Taliban bad. Are you saying that they're not as bad as we're told?
No, they're not. You know, Afghan culture is very tough. It's been around for hundreds of years. And the Taliban have been around since the 90s. When they came to power, they made some terrible mistakes. But, you know,
Who doesn't?
they never had any ambitions for power. They were living in the country after the Soviet occupation, studying the Quran. Taliban means student, and that's what they were doing, and they got sucked into the lawlessness of the country, and they ended up being asked to sort out all the problems, and they ended up taking control. They weren't. They had no ambitions for it. They, you know, just and it showed. You know, they made some disastrous decisions, and
But nothing as
now,
catastrophic as Brexit, that's for sure.
well, now they've returned. They've had 20 years in exile, or out of the spotlight. But for the last 10 years, they've actually been in power in the south of Afghanistan, raising taxes, running courts, running administrations. And this is something that nobody has really reported on.
Yeah, because it doesn't fit the narrative that the West wants to portray.
No, it doesn't. You know, they just want to portray them as savages in flip-flops, shalwa kameez, and machine guns, when in fact, you know, they have become quite sophisticated. And what they have done this time round is that they realized that they couldn't be isolationist and they couldn't withdraw into an Islamic bubble. So, as well as winning hearts and minds within the country, they've also been in trade talks for quite a few months now before they got into Kabul. They've been in trade talks with China, Russia, Turkey, Pakistan, even Iran. Now, then, you know, people never thought that they would reach out as Sunni followers, that they would reach out to the Shia in Iran, but they have. And
maybe Liz Truss needs to get in there, get a wee trade deal going for the UK.
Well, it's quite obvious, I think, that China finds the prospect of opening up the old trade route right through from China, right through the old Silk Road, as quite an attractive prospect. And of course, Afghanistan is slap bang in the middle, and it would make sense. Unfortunately, the Americans have got them in a terrible dilemma at the moment by freezing all of their assets, and there is no cash. And
well, I know who the real terrorists are. Yeah, but to get back, when you come out into, you then get into the anti-war coalition, Stop the War coalition, rather. You became very active in that. Again, was this, I mean, you've always been anti-war, but did this, what happened in Afghanistan, make you more determined to do something to stop any future war?
Yes, being bombed by America and Britain certainly focused my attention. I don't know why I hadn't thought of it before, but bombs and weapons don't discriminate between man, woman, child, nationalities, somebody in uniform, somebody out of uniform. And you can hear a cruise missile from 20 miles away, and these were coming within quarter of a mile of the prison. And I was absolutely terrified because well, even if I was in a house in Afghanistan, there's nowhere to run, there's nowhere to hide, there's nowhere to escape this sort of terror. And it was like one of those road to Damascus visions, that it just realized you cannot bring peace by the barrel of a gun, by terrifying people, civilians. It was just, for me.
But it's not about bringing peace. It's about making a certain people in the American military industrial complex rich. Nothing to do with peace. Nothing to do with anything except making money.
Well, that's right. A lot of people, the neocons, did get rich from this, and
which brought us on to another fantastic, interesting episode in your life, because the Allies started moving on to Iraq to get Saddam the second time, which was to be the catalyst for you leaving the Labour Party, but they couldn't get the second resolution through to give them some cloak of respectability about what they were about to do. So there was a plan afoot. The Americans wanted to discredit the people in the Security Council to try and blackmail them. And a certain young lady, a brave young lady in GCHQ in Cheltenham called Catherine Gunn, leaked a memo from, or a signal, or I don't know what you call it, signal from America, asking GCHQ, the British, to start finding dirt on all the different delegates, the different delegations at the UN. And that memo, that telegram, whatever you want to call it, came into your possession. Now, I'll not ask you how to protect, however your sources said it, but it came into your possession.
Yes. Very brave people in GCHQ. The first one, who I called Isabel, I met the previous year at a Stop the War event, and she made herself known to me. I thought I was being lured into some sort of trap. And so I just said, contact, here's my card, contact me when you've got something. And so I left thinking I'm not going to hear from her again. And then I got this phone call from Isabel, and I met her in a cafe in Soho. And she gave me this extraordinary email, which was a guy called Frank Koza from the NSA ordering British intelligence to spy on every single member of the UN Security Council to find out which way that they were going to vote for the war in Iraq. It was absolutely astonishing. And so I took the document away and had it verified by an intelligence contact, because I wanted to make sure that it wasn't a setup. And he was quite astonished by the contents as well, and actually irritated that the Americans had the audacity to think that they could do this. The whole tone of the email was really shocking. And then I gave it to somebody in the Daily Mirror. I'm very much one of these people who, oh, there's my dog going crazy.
I thought Ian Lawson had turned up to visit you when I heard the barking.
Honey's just knocked over the light. And I was really surprised at the content of this, or he was. And so I gave it to a friend at the Daily Mirror. What I should have done was gone straight to Piers Morgan, the editor, but instead I gave it to one of the less senior staff, and he didn't have the intelligence contacts to verify the document. So he said that he wasn't going to use it. And so it was sent back to me on by courier. And I then rang John Sweeney from the Observer, and he was in Iraq, and he said, give it to Martin Bright. Yeah. So I gave it, I met Martin, not in an underground car park. That's a bit of Hollywood drama there. I met him in a Greasy Spoon in Soho, where I used to conduct most of my sort of out of office business, and gave it to him. The real hero was Ed Vulliamy, who was the American or based in America for the Observer, and he was able to not only stand up the document as being authentic, but also he was able to verify the existence of Frank Koza. Yeah. So it was, and then for some bizarre reason, which we'll never understand, Catherine went and fessed up and dropped the three of us in it.
I know, but the thing that I should say, there was a movie made about that, and that's why, just to enlighten people about the car park, there's a movie with Keira Knightley, and it's called Official Secrets, folks. It's on Netflix. Watch it. And the person that played you was a Cockney, for goodness sake, a London actress. Could they have not got a northern actress to play you? But please, she confessed. But before that, there was something in the Observer, in the newsroom. Some young girl who was the copy before it went to print. She took the Americanisms out of it and changed it to British English. And that's how they were able to deny it at first, by saying, well, you spelt favourable wrong. And I can't remember what the other word was now. That they said, sorry, that's not authentic because it's, you know, Americans wouldn't spell it that way.
Yes, it was very frustrating in the end. And it you know, I'd had that document for about 4 weeks, and, you know, I worked really hard to try and get it published, and most of the papers in Fleet Street at that time were pro-war, and many of the political editors and staff were really in the sway and influence of Tony Blair and Alistair Campbell. Mm-hmm. And the political editor at the Observer was a guy called Carmel Ahmed. And when he said, you know, where has this document come from? They said, you know, Yvonne Ridley. And it was like, oh, that's that stupid woman who fell off a donkey. Don't go anywhere near this. It'll be like the Hitler Diaries. It'll be fake. And he is now head of editorial news in the BBC.
Well, there you go.
He was a friend of Alistair Campbell's and Tony Blair, and the editor, Roger Alton, was persuaded that the new political editor should be Carmel Ahmed. And of course, he was sitting there doing his best to make sure
protect the Labour Party.
Story never saw the light of day.
But I mean, there's not enough hours in the day or enough hours in the Prism to go through all the things you've had. But just to go on, just for the listeners, but I hope we can come back and fill in gaps in between. But in 2019, Yvonne, this is like, I feel a wee bit like Eamon Andrews. I should be carrying a red book under my arm. Yvonne Ridley, this is you, Lee. But in 2019, you did some work in Myanmar, and I hope I can pronounce this properly, for the Rohingya tribe.
The Rohingya.
Rohingya, I beg your pardon, which got you a nomination for a Nobel Peace Prize.
Yes.
Wow. Now, I can honestly say in Scottish Prism, we've not had many Nobel Prize people on or people nominated. You must have been, I mean, it shows you the work that you've done. But you also got that as well for, you were doing work with people in Syria, women in Syria who were tortured. And that's why you were nominated for the Nobel Prize. How did you get into that?
Well, I didn't know that I'd been nominated until
No, I mean, how did you get into working in Myanmar to help these?
Oh, right. Well, it was a team of lawyers in South Africa who I'd met previously, who invited me to come along and join them in taking statements from the Rohingya refugees who'd fled Myanmar and who were living in Bangladesh in refugee camps. And they wanted to get all of these sworn statements drawn up, proper affidavits in the correct languages, and put them in an electronic bank, so that when any of the Myanmar military wandered into countries where the law of universal jurisdiction applied, they could be arrested. And of course, their lawyers would say, well, where's the evidence? And this electronic bank would be instantly accessible, and all the evidence against the military had been catalogued. So I went along to report the work that they were doing, but one of the lawyers was unable to come. And so they asked me if I would step in. And I did. And, I was taking statements from these poor people who, the stories were just beyond belief. And there was one young boy who heard that we were taking these statements, and he came to me, and he spoke a little English, and he said, I want to tell my story. And I looked at him and asked him how old he was, and he said he was 14. And I said, we'll need your parents' permission. And he said they're both dead. And it was obvious that he had a story to tell. So I had a word with the lawyers, and we took his statement, and oh my goodness, it was horrific. And you just realize that the capacity to do terrible things to each other, it was just awful, really horrendous. And this was straight off the back of coming from the Syrian border, where I'd interviewed some women who had got out of Assad's prisons. And the rape there was on an industrial scale, so much so that Assad's intelligence services, who were raping these women on an almost daily basis, were actually taking Viagra or Levitra to make sure that they could carry on raping all of these women. And it was really thought out and premeditated. It was horrific. And so there was all of that. And after leaving Myanmar and Syria, I then went back to South Africa and took part in an evidence-based tour of South Africa, talking about how rape is being used as a weapon of war. And we did about 15 venues, and I thought it might be cathartic talking about this, but it actually had the reverse effect. And when I got home, I became quite ill, and I was diagnosed with PTSD.
I'm not surprised with the thick life you've had.
Well, you know, there was obviously something wrong, and I went to see my GP, and she was in tears when I told her some of the stories, and she just said, you know, you obviously haven't been able to process any of this. I mean, I've been in some shocking situations, seen terrible things, but I've always been able to process it. But there is no solution to the plight of the Rohingya. There's nearly 1 million of them that are living in appalling conditions in Bangladesh, a country that's poor anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And they are too afraid to return home to Myanmar. And the you know, you're documenting the atrocities, and you just think, what is the solution? What is the United Nations doing? You know, the United Nations was brought together for this very purpose of never again. And yet the Rwandan genocide, the Rohingya genocide, the Srebrenica massacre in Bosnia, and all sorts of other atrocities, you know, it's still going on. And I just think now the United Nations is not fit for purpose.
The problem is that the Americans control it. That's the problem, and it's something they don't like or approve of. And for those who don't know, Myanmar is actually better known by us as Burma.
Yeah, I'm glad you were impressed though by the Nobel Peace Prize nomination, because when I told my mother, she said, well, it's only a nomination. She said, are you, you know, do you think you'll get it? And I said, probably not. But I said, you know, the fact that I've been nominated, and she went, don't count your chickens. So
as I say, there's not many people get nominated, let alone win it. Yvonne, I've got to say that regrettably, we're running out. In fact, we've run out of time a long while ago. But two things, just to finish off on this, if I may. In 2011, you crossed the border into Scotland to live. You're now a member of the Alapa Party. You know, maybe I could get you back sometime to talk about what's going on with women and women's rights in Scotland, because that must be something that is of interest to you.
It certainly is. This is my T-shirt, Woman Up.
Yeah.
I have fought for women's rights all my life, and I just feel as though the clock has been turned back to the 1950s by the SNP and the Green Party, and I cannot for the life of me understand what the hell they're playing at. I kept quiet for long enough because I know what it's like to be in a persecuted minority. I've seen what hate can do, and I never want to be accused of racism or bigotry or any sort of ism. And so I kept quiet, thinking that making excuses really about why we should allow trans women into women's safe spaces, until I finally snapped and just realized, to put it bluntly, it's more control being imposed by men, except this time it's men in dresses. And that's I hesitated to say it, but I've said it now. I do know trans people, and I've said to them, if these politicians really, really cared about you, they wouldn't have allowed the toilet situation, the ambiguity to arise. They would have created decent toilet accommodation in all buildings. You know, when for disabled people, when the laws kicked in, everybody had to start building handrails and ramps and all sorts of other things to accommodate disabled people. And I don't know why these politicians can't do something practical to help the genuine trans women. And it's, if somebody wants to transition, they shouldn't have to wait 2, 3, 4 years. They should be fast tracked and should be helped and assisted. And at the moment, all they're getting from politicians is weasel words and the signing of the Stonewall documents. And, I was a big fan of Stonewall. This was a heroic organization that really put gay rights front and center where they should have been. And they did a terrific job. But this path that they've gone down has alienated a lot of gay people. I've got some lesbian friends who are furious because they've been called homophobic after saying they would never want to go into a relationship with a trans woman. And so they have been called homophobic because of that. The whole thing has just gone crazy. And for the Scottish government, what made me snap was when the Scottish government wouldn't recognise misogyny against as a hate crime, and wouldn't incorporate anything to do with women in its GRA proposals. And then they just recently they referred to pregnant people, and only women can get pregnant.
Breastfeeders.
And this has alienated so many midwives and nursing staff in the NHS, this language which is airbrushing women out of the picture. Macmillan Cancer doesn't talk about cervical cancer, although they do acknowledge and talk about prostate cancer, but cervical cancer, it's not referred to, and women and cervical cancer are not referred to. And it's just the tail is now wagging the dog. I will fight for anybody's human rights. I've been on picket lines, I've been on lines against police in Cairo for the Palestinian rights. My credentials as somebody who believes in human rights is right out there. And I believe everybody should be treated equally, but not to the detriment of other groups. Else. And so, agreed. Yeah, you've pressed a button there.
Well, we shall have a longer discussion on this at some time. I might even have to do this interview in 2 parts. But let me, Yvonne, thank you so much, and for your resilience yet again, that we get through these technical problems that we had for 2 days, that we get through it and finally got this, which is something I'm so glad that I managed to capture. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, and I will no doubt meet you sometime at one of the ALAPA conferences or national councils or whatever. But in the meantime, can I thank you for being my guest today?
Well, I've really enjoyed it, and apologies for the telephones going off, the dogs going off, and the cat crying, and the BT. There's been a cast of thousands that have done their best.
But it's been worth it. We got it through. And to you, my viewers, I hope you've enjoyed this, as much as I have. And till I see you all again, to you and yours, please take care. Goodbye.
Bye.
Through a Scottish Prism, the programme that is unapologetically pro-Scottish independence and anti-Westminster rule. Everything we say here is viewed through a Scottish prism. Brought to you by Barhead Boy.